going, everybody? Thought I'd try this out. Basically, on the recommendation of other people who are running channels. I've been along a lot of these men's channels, and I have things to say that I think might be able to help some people. But really, I'm doing this because I don't like journaling, and this is going to be like a video journal that I'm going to use to kind of think through and sort out some things, and hopefully some of you find it useful, interesting, thought-provoking, maybe even helpful. We'll see. Being my first video ever and not even know if I'm going to even post this, I'm just going to go ahead and start with a basic, venting or rant, breaking down some general thoughts. And I see a lot of men on these men's groups that really aren't happy, and for a lot of reasons, and I think they're all pretty valid. Most of them anyways. A lot of them are self-inflicted. But I want to address some things that I notice, and I'm going to bring up some things that might be some future topics that I'll dive into a little deeper and really expand on some thoughts on these things. But one of the things I want to talk about first is who exactly is happy, Look around right now, and it's pretty easy to think everyone's pretty unhappy, and a lot of people are pretty unhappy. I think maybe more so than any time in history, people are not able to reconcile their reality with what they expected in life. So I think perhaps there's something to the cognitive dissonance of having a great expectation of a wildly successful, fun, exotic life, the Hollywood dream, or the typical things that young people dream about, yachts and cars and beautiful people and all those things, and then you grow up and realize that is pretty much just a dream for most people, and that most folks are going to end up working an average life. Average is good, half the people on earth are doing worse than average, so I think aspiring to be average is actually not such a bad thing. Maybe it's limiting for some people, but back to who are the happiest people, and I've thought about this quite a bit. I'm in my middle age, I have a family, I've raised a kid. I've watched unhappy people quite a bit, and I've looked around to see who are the happy ones and why. And I've come to recognize that it seems more prevalent that people are happy with their circumstances even when they're poor. Typically, they choose to be happy, and that's important, because you can choose to be miserable in circumstances that most people on earth would find almost like heaven. To most people in the third world, living poor in America would be a dream come true. But living poor in America is pretty miserable when you look around and see people doing better than you. So choosing to accept where you're at in life, choosing to recognize the things that are worth putting your effort, putting your time, and putting your attention into, those go a long way into helping you find some kind of happiness, or at least fulfillment. And so I say that happiness is a choice, and I do believe that, with a big but. And that but is, there needs to be some kind of fulfillment, something truly fulfilling in your life if you want to have any kind of lasting happiness. And I think you see most people who would claim they're happy have children, and I think there's good reason for that. Any person who actually tries to be a good parent and has any kind of success at all raising a child understands the pure joy of watching someone you created figure out something for the first time, and just watching that discovery happen in real time, and knowing that you are actually a part of creating that moment. It's a real blessing that it can't really be duplicated in other ways, but you can try. I'm not saying you can't be fulfilled without a family, but I think it's maybe a little bit harder to narrow down things that would be truly fulfilling, that would lead you to a life where you could choose happiness. If you don't choose or can't lock down a family, I know that's a problem for a lot of people. And I would say the key of fulfillment is that you're accomplishing things and that you're growing. This can be personal accomplishment, this can be personal growth, but I have found that I'm thinking back, but I can't think of a single person I know in my life. I'm nearing 50 years old, so it's a pretty good long time. But I don't know a single person who is happy and they're sitting still, not growing, not accomplishing anything, not setting a new further boundary to try and reach. So there's definitely an element to this growth and accomplishment that maybe is a prerequisite for being able to choose to be happy with and be fulfilled by that level of accomplishment and growth. It's a barometer to measure yourself against. So if you're not happy now, but you have some good goals and you see some accomplishment and growth, you can actually choose to be happy in that little bit of growth rather than whether or not your goal was accomplished. So it's a really important thing. And frankly, having a wife and trying to make a successful marriage, raising kids, those are just extensions of that accomplishment and growth. That's done properly. It's done by adults who already have solidified these goals and this embodiment of living life in a means to find fulfillment. So, you take two adults that already have their crap together and put a child in that relationship, and you get to now live vicariously through that child, and that growth and that accomplishment of that child is magnified. But it's not different. It's the same sense of fulfillment. It's the same sense of accomplishment. So all these young men, and maybe not so young men, that are struggling to find someone that would be worth their risk to settle down and have a family with, and I totally understand that. That does not mean you can't find accomplishment or fulfillment or happiness in your life. It just means that you're going to have to be a little more careful in what you choose to pursue, maybe. I want to get back to this happiness thing a little bit, and I want to talk more specifically about men, because I am a man, and while I may have some good insights that women could use, and they may be very useful to them and very fruitful, I come from the perspective of a man, so I believe it'll be more useful for men. So I'm going to go and illustrate these points through the life of a man. And we're talking about happiness and who is happy, and when it comes to men, you look at men and say, when were you happy? And almost all of us were happy as little boys if we had even a reasonably decent childhood. And for those who didn't, I understand, but just bear with my thought process here, and I think you'll probably find some value in it anyway. But little boys are happy. And little boys are happy for a lot of reasons, but we can boil it down to a few different things. Little boys aren't afraid to do what interests them. They are so curious, and they're so fascinated by the world and the way things work, and they want to understand how things are put together and how to take them apart. And they do these things on impulse. It's not always a good thing, but it is a very free way to approach life, and it's a way to do it where you can let the feedback of the moment inform your decision making rather than getting mired down in trying to predict all of the potential pitfalls or rewards of some kind of behavior. Little boys don't always think about that. They think, I want to do this and see what happens, and more often than not, the result is at least entertaining, and even in the failures of those things, they're certainly informative, and they're the way that boys learn the best. They're the way that we can, you don't have to touch a hot stove twice, I guess is what I'm getting at. We learn so much better by interacting with the world around us. And that's a way more fulfilling way for men to approach the world. We need to look at it as a system that we belong in some way, and that we interact in some way, and that we have some kind of control and input to. With that said, the systems come with rules, and one of the things that I think makes boys happy, and one of the things that actually defines the characteristic of being a boy, is breaking some damn rules. I've probably done it too much in my life, paid for it. I've definitely caused strife in my life by choosing to go my own way. Maybe some of those I regret, maybe not. I'd have to really think deeper on whether I regret those negative outcomes or whether the personal growth was worth it. I'm inclined to think the personal growth was worth it. The other thing boys do that makes them happy is build stuff. And that includes breaking stuff. The very act of construction and destruction is something inherent to boys' nature. And I think that, we suffer greatly when we ignore that. Look at any little boy and a stick becomes a sword or a gun or a fort. A box becomes a train or a boat or a house. Give a boy a Tonka tractor and he's over there building roadways, and it's part of who we are. It's part of how we were created. And a lot of boys, I think, get sedated by entertainment devices, and I'm not saying that video games and things like that are inherently bad, but I think that they're detrimental in a way that they rob your attention from things that engage your mind in a way that help you maintain a path that puts you on, in the direction where you're going to have accomplishment and growth. So I guess what I would say is there's opportunity cost with those is the best way to describe it. So little boys nowadays are being sat in front of videos and video games and television and who knows, all manner of things that don't do anything for them to stimulate their brains in any meaningful way. And they're not building things. They're not breaking things apart. The society, and especially single mothers, doesn't really allow that anymore, and that's a damn shame. But I think if you want to be happy as a man, you need to embrace those concepts that, I'm almost 50, but I'm still a little boy in some ways. And in those ways, I do want to pursue what interests me. Now, I have to focus on work, and I have family that, means I have obligations and responsibilities, and not everything I do, not all of my time can be dedicated to things that interest me. However, you see, I work on a farm. I was a machinist, I was a mechanic in the Air Force, I was an electrician, I was a project manager. I've done all manner of different types of work, and I can continue to push myself into places where I actually get to do some things that are interesting. And I give up a lot of, it's another opportunity cost. I give up a lot of chances to make a lot more money than I could. But I get to be out here in this beautiful environment. I get sunshine and exercise every day. At the end of the day, I produce something. I'm building. I have a tangible marker for my professional growth and accomplishment. So every single day working on a farm is fulfilling because I get to come up with a new challenge almost every single day and get to overcome that. And I think that a lot of men are rightly pursuing financial goals. I'm not trying to make a moral statement about whether it's proper and good to chase money. I think for some people there's no reason why they shouldn't. All people have different interests and goals, and perhaps pushing that financial envelope is the kind of pursuing of your interest that really does give you some kind of sense of accomplishment. And if that's the case, then great. For me, I've never really been interested in that, and it's not a reward that gives me the tingles. So I want to see tangible things in front of me that I've created. So I want to step on next to just some real basic, very overgeneral step one kind of thinking for how a man could gain some insight as to what might be meaningful in their life. What kind of avenues could you pursue, especially as, well, not even as a young man, but I know there's a lot of young men that are feeling pretty lost, so maybe this is a little more directed towards you, but it's really for everyone. Look for God. Just look for God. I'm not going to tell you which God you should believe in. I have mine. I came to it through a lot of looking, a lot of reading, a lot of asking people, a lot of asking tough questions, painful moments, all of those things. And for me, my faith in my God is the keystone of that. But I'm relatively a new believer. I lived as an atheist or agnostic, or you can argue about that all day, until I was in my 40s. But one of the things I did during my whole adult life was looked around, and I realized that billions of people throughout all of human history have all shared this notion, this predetermination. No, that's not right. It's a inherent knowledge that there's something larger than us that binds us all together. And it doesn't really matter what tradition you look at historically, they all share some really similar, they all run in similar veins, they all kind of tackle the same types of issues, and they all end up being some kind of description, explanation, maybe a manual or an instruction book for pursuing a meaningful life in society. And I've looked into several different religions, and I think they all offer some things of real value. But I think the biggest value is that they all pursue what is true. So when I say look for God, what I really mean is don't be satisfied with an answer that you can't claim as truth you believe in. Don't be satisfied with a life that you don't understand why you are pursuing the things you're pursuing. It's very hard to find meaning in your life when you're pursuing things because that's what you ought to do. When you have God, or at least a definitive moral code, you have a lot less decision making to perform in your life, and it simplifies some of these things for you. And I can say that that pursuit of truth and the simplification of, in some sense it's a simplification of the rules you play by, but in another sense it's Jordan Peterson says, he mentions quite often that it's fascinating how often when you're in a creative enterprise that putting restraints on your creativity is sometimes the best way to spur creativity, and that the limitations themselves are the things that make you think outside the box. And I would say that in many ways, the pursuit of truth is just like that. You've limited yourself to ignore your thoughts and feelings about a thing, but to pursue the actual evidence. And that's so useful for this constant growth concept. Alright, now, another thing that men can do, anyone can do, but again, this is for men, is laughing at your failures and celebrating your wins. I'm not a huge believer in mental health as a scientific field or anything like that, but there's a lot of truth to what they've discovered. And I think it's pretty important to recognize that we're in an era where people's mental health is terrible, and we don't know how to deal with things properly. And I mentioned earlier that there's a cognitive dissonance when the expectations you have for what your life will look like don't match the reality you're able to produce. And I'd say that mental health is driving your actions to cognitive consonance. You need to produce a life that is congruent with your expectation. And that's twofold. So one, you need to be realistic about your expectations. You know, you got to look around, you got to look at history, you need to look at actual examples of people and what it took for them to get where they want. And you set a goal and you find someone who's accomplished something like it, and you find out what they really did, and not the Facebook or the TikTok version of it, but the real story, the sleepless nights, the wondering if they're paying bills to, pursue another avenue, all those dirty details that people tend to think don't have to happen for success. So I think people first, you need to set expectations that are realistic, and then you need to set your goals within those expectations, or maybe just outside, going back to being a little boy and breaking the rules, Maybe it's okay to believe you can be a superhero. Just don't think you can fly, But I think it's really important that we align our expectations and what we can produce in reality. And we're going to fail, In most things, you're going to fail probably more often than you succeed. And I don't know who the quote's attributed to, and if I post this and if anyone watches it, go ahead and post a comment about it. But there's an old saying that says, successful people have failed more than failures ever tried. And I know that's true. So you gotta laugh at your failures. You gotta expect failure. If you want cognitive consonance, part of your expectation needs to be the reality that failure is not only an option, but it's the likely option. And that anytime you don't fail, you have won. So laugh at your failures. Understand that they were expected, and that this failure just means now you know where not to step next time. You know which road not to take. And that's a success in itself. So we need to celebrate these wins that we get. And it can be anything, man. It could be getting through a day without getting down on yourself. It could be taking a minute to stop on the side of the road and help someone with a flat tire and walk away just feeling good about it. It could be anything, but we need to give ourselves credit for when we set out a plan and we take a step and that step lands where we wanted it to. That's a huge win. In the chaos of this universe and the infinite variables in your life, anything at all going according to your plan, if it's a good plan, is a win. And don't you ever let someone take it away from you. It's really important that in a world where everyone wants to tear each other down, that you understand how to build yourself up. Finally, for this video, talked a lot about happiness and goals and maybe some real rough ideas of how to get there, but where are we getting? And this is a key that I think a lot of people don't understand. And maybe in all the ways I've failed in my life and all the ways I haven't lived up to what I thought I wanted to be, I think the one realization that I've come to that stands out above all else is that I get to define what success means. And then I get to assess myself and see if I actually achieved it. And that's not for anyone else to say. So for me in my life, I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a father. It was really important to me. I'm going to try not to say too many personal things because I don't want all my own personal information out there, and two is I don't want to push these things onto other people. But let's just say I didn't have the father that I desired. I didn't have the father that the nice picture that society painted had promised. I didn't get the father that understood that parenting was more than just providing. And you know what? That's okay. It's a man from another era that didn't understand really what the needs of his children were, and he did his best, so I'm okay with that. But I defined my success from a very young age as not being divorced, having a wife that respects me, that likes me, and that loves me, and having and raising children that grew up to respect me and want to be around me. Sounds like a really simple definition for success, and it is, but like many things in life, sometimes the simplest things are the most difficult. And in a society that seems hell-bent on destroying the family and undermining male authority in the family and celebrating bad behavior and defiance of natural order, raising a kid that wants to be around a parent is quite a feat. So even though my goals maybe didn't seem so lofty, I look back and, my daughter's a young adult. She's engaged to be married. She's doing very well in her life, way better than I was at her age. And that's the other part of my success was I wanted my children to take on all of my best qualities, hopefully. The things that I knew were good about me, that I nurtured. And I hoped to God that I would shield her from my worst qualities. And that in every way, in every facet of her life, I provided a stepping stone that allowed her to surpass me. And so far I've done that. So I can look at my life and point at all sorts of ways that most people would look and say I'm a failure. I'm not financially successful, though I'm not in any real trouble. But, I don't run a business. I don't command a whole lot of people. I don't even have a whole lot of friends. But what I do have is what I really wanted. And I have that because from a young age I understood that my goals that I set were set for a purpose, and that purpose was not to show off, and it wasn't to prove anything to anybody but myself, and maybe to God, that people can be better, and that it doesn't matter how you were failed, it doesn't matter what you lack, but if you set proper, good, positive, useful, and actually realistic goals. And then you pursue them with every fiber of your being. And when push comes to shove, and when those moments come where you get to take the right path or the wrong path, you never ever compromise on your principles. You spend the time pursuing the truth so that you are confident in what is right, and you never ever tell a lie, change your story, or misrepresent yourself in a way to fit in, because you may find a temporary success in something like that. But every step away from your principles and your foundation that you take is a crack in that foundation, and eventually the water will reach into that crack, and it'll freeze and it'll melt, and it'll freeze and it'll melt, and it will break apart your foundation until you look around and there's no foundation left. Stick to your guns, find the truth, stay principled, make realistic goals, pursue them with all of your heart, and take all of your free time and concentrate it on things that bring you in the direction of the growth and accomplishment that would prove your goal to be accomplished. Anyway, I'm going to watch this back. I'll decide whether I'm going to post it or not. Shout out to guys like Bo who encourage men to do this and who are hosting spaces where men can share these things. I don't see a lot of channels of successfully married men, successful parents. I don't see a whole lot of people sharing the things that worked. I see a lot of people talking about what didn't work and how to try and address that, and that's great and that's useful. But I'm going to try and put out some things that are more of a here's how to recognize when you're not making progress, and here's how to perhaps look at life from the perspective of someone who's had at least some moderate success. Anyway, I wish you all the best. I love you all. Good luck to you.